Hello, and welcome to tonight's show. I'm Mickey Spear. I'm a musician, author, and host of The Healing Half, where we take less than 30 minutes every single week to learn how can we address our own wounds as well as help others with theirs. And together, once we have both of those pieces, we will change the world on how other people are loved in their times of hardship. And tonight we have an amazing guest with us, and we're going to be talking about Don't Diminish My Loss, which is so important because we live in a world that is constantly telling us, you know what, everybody kind of goes through that. So don't talk about it. And that is not true. But before we jump into tonight, I just wanted to say hi. If you are listening, whether live or as a replay, let me know in the comment section. And then Paige and I are going to go back through potentially afterwards, see everything. We'd love to know where you're calling in from, and just to know that you are watching. So please make sure you do that. And I guess I'll go first. I'm Nikki Spear. I'm calling in from Arcata, California, which you should totally look up if you haven't yet. It's beautiful up here. A little cold for my liking, but that's okay. And when I was 13, my mom died of cancer, and I spent the better part of a decade pretending I was fine, running from my grief, and really buying into that lie that I'm strong, so I shouldn't be weak. And I have to just put up this front and not let anybody in. And as you can imagine, that never works. And so eventually I learned the power of going to the counselor and processing emotions and being vulnerable. And I wanted to start a show that I got to interview fantastic people like the guests we have on tonight, where we get to hear all about perspectives and stories we perhaps can't relate to, but hopefully will give us tools to add to our tool belt. So then that way, when we either face it later down the road or we have a friend going through a situation we don't quite understand, we are more confident in how to help, because there's nothing worse out there than feeling like you're helpless and that you don't know what to say and you don't know what to do. And this show tackles that head on. So right before, one last thing before we bring on the wonderful Paige of It's Hard podcast is, if you are in the Minnesota area, one of our partners on the show is Brighter Days Grief Center. And man, they are a resource you want to have in your tool belt. On their website, brighterdays.org, they have a bunch of scenarios and different resources for that. So if you know somebody who lost a child, they've got a bunch of organizations you can connect them with. Well, one of their biggest fundraisers of the year is coming up, and it's called Family Fun Day. And even though it's happening on August 14th, they would like you, if you are going to show up, to register ahead of time. So I did put that link in the comment section. It is just a really cute opportunity. It's going to be so much fun. Kids get in free. So feel free to share that link on your Facebook page. Again, it's a fundraiser for an amazing grief organization. And if you're like, oh, shoot, I'm busy that weekend, or you're like, I'm not even in Minnesota, there's no way I can make it, but you'd like to donate, that link will allow you to donate as well. So tonight we are talking about a tough topic, which is, again, don't diminish my loss. And we've got the wonderful Paige from It's Hard podcast here. So Paige, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it is such an honor. And I can't wait for people to get to know you better and hear all about your podcast, because you guys, it's a really good podcast. So you should absolutely check it out. So I'll give you tons of time to talk about that in just a little bit. But tonight I want to hear all about you and one of your first losses, which was your grandpa. Do you mind just kind of telling us that story?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my grandpa and I were really close. When I was young, we would go up and see him in Grand Rapids. We're based in the Minnesota area, so we'd go up to Grand Rapids and we'd see him all the time when he lived up there. And then as he got older, he did move down to Stillwater, which is where we live with my parents. And so he moved into kind of like a older retirement home, and so he was really close to us when I was younger. And so as we, grew up, went through high school, him and I shared a car. I would,
Oh,
like, my dad said that if I had a car, I had to share it with grandpa, and I was like, that's fine. And I had a hot pink steering wheel, and my grandpa absolutely loved it because he could always tell which car was his in Walmart. So he loved it. And he was just the funniest man. I mean, he wore pleated like pressed pants and a dress shirt every single day without fail. I literally have like one of his dress shirts as a pillow. I can't figure out my
Mm,
because he
yeah,
was
that's
like it's
wonderful.
so cute. They have like little things on the back, but so he was just like the most well-dressed man in the whole world and just the sweetest thing. As he got older, he just started showing signs of, forgetting things, a little bit of like
Mm,
early onset dementia, but definitely not very severe, very mild. But he would try to kind of offset it by, writing things down, remembering stuff. And he had struggled. At one point, he did end up having to have triple bypass surgery. So his heart was just not super strong. He had strokes and heart attacks as, we were growing up. And so when I was a senior in high school, he was actually doing really well. He was really healthy. He went to his little gym in his retirement place a lot. And he lived in, a home where they checked on him every once in a while, but he wasn't fully, in a nursing home, if you will. So he was really healthy. He was really independent. And one day he just wasn't feeling good and he asked my mom if she'd take him to the doctor, and he said, I just something's not right. I don't feel good. And whenever he said that, you knew it was serious. He wasn't the kind to just kind of mess around with that. And it was so weird. I mean, there was never anything severe that happened. It just sort of all of a sudden he must have had what we figured out later was it was a severe stroke. And it ended up putting him in the hospital and he couldn't really talk. He just kind of lost all of his, normal day-to-day things as far as talking, communicating, just awareness in general, which resulted in him, being in a hospital room and just kind of being not really there and not himself whatsoever. So for us it was really that was when the grief process started, I think, because he wasn't him any longer. And knowing him so well, like he never wanted to be a burden to anyone. He loved his independence. And so I knew how hard it was for him that like he was in the hospital and not able to speak and not able to say anything. And that was almost harder on him than, if he had just passed in that moment.
mm,
Um so, should I just keep going on kind of the whole story? Okay, sweet. Yeah, I just
yeah.
want to make sure. So, he was in the hospital. I was, like I said, a senior in high school. It was just after New Year's. So, it was, just after, I guess, after Christmas, into New Year's. I remember it was New Year's Eve, and I was deciding if I should go to my friend's cabin because I knew that he was definitely not doing well. And so my mom was like, go, like, grandpa would want you to go. I was at the hospital every single day. So I went to my friend's cabin. I said, I'm just going to go for the night and then I'll come back the next day. And I got there and my mom texted me, fairly late at night and was like, you should probably get back as soon as you can tomorrow. So I went back and she just said, he's just not doing super well. And I remember I'd gone back to the hospital and my parents were in like the prayer room,
Mm,
and I forget what that's called, maybe like the chapel room or something like that. But they were in that room and that was when they told me that the doctors had told them that grandpa was probably not going to come back from this. Because we were still kind of waiting to see if he'd recover at all. But there was just too much brain damage to his brain and everything else that he was just not going to be able to come back in the way that he would want to live his life. And I think that was a really hard decision for my family and just a really hard thing to come to realize that ultimately, like, yes, he could stay alive, like he could survive. He was breathing on his own. However, his quality of life would not be great. He couldn't walk on his own, he couldn't speak, he couldn't do anything. Um, and so that was when it ended up being that he would go into hospice, and that we would end up saying goodbye to him. And, like I said earlier, I had been spending every single day at the hospital. I was going to school. So I would go to school and then halfway through the day, I'd go to the hospital. I'd have lunch there. I'd hang out for a little bit. Then I'd go back to school and then I'd go back to the hospital after school. So I was literally there more than I was home, just being with him as much as humanly possible. And then he went to hospice and he was just really not responsive at that point. He was just kind of in coma truly at that point, not even opening his eyes, not seeing us at all. And we would go and check on him every day. And then it was just kind of a matter of when it would happen. Um, And then I remember we were going to a hockey game for my friend, and my mom and I said, I want to stop and see grandpa quick just before we head to the game. So we stopped. My dad went straight to the game. Um and his breathing was really heavy and bothered, and just something wasn't right. And I said, I just don't think this is right. And my mom said, I honestly think it might be time. And it was kind of a sign that, like, okay, he wanted me and my mom there for sure. And then we said, Dad, why don't you come too? Um, and it was about an hour later that he did pass with all of us there. So I did see my grandpa pass. I was only 18 at the time, and it was really hard. Like, watching
Mm.
that is really challenging. It's part of it is really healing in a way, because you know the finality of it. You know what that you're there and that they wanted you there. My sister wasn't there, and we continue to this day to say, like, I think he knew who could handle and who wanted to be there. Like, my sister could is very strong, she could handle it. She just didn't want to be there for it, and so I think he didn't want to be alone, but he also wanted to make sure it was the people who wanted to be there and felt comfortable. So yeah, it was really, really challenging. And past that was many different things, from, like you said, to people being like, well, grandpa's die and he was 83 and he was this and he was that. And it's like, yeah, but my relationship with him was so strong that he was a big
Mm.
void, missing from our lives after we lost him. And he still is to this day. We miss him so
Yeah.
much.
Oh my gosh, I'm over here crying. Thank
I
you so much
know.
for sharing. Your grandpa sounds
Mm,
amazing. And I think you hit the nail on the head where to the world, people could have, and this is not to say you cannot be close with a grandparent across the country,
mhm,
but you can have a grandparent across the country that you see like on Christmas once a year. And that's not to say you don't love them, but it's just really unfortunate that we live in a society that kind of
mm,
says like, oh, your grandparent must mean X to you. And it kind of just has this like blanket term of like hierarchy, which is unfair because obviously your grandpa was super close to you. I mean, who else shared a car with their grandpa? That's so beautiful. But of course, when you go to school, it's just my grandpa died. And people
mhm.
then kind of run it through that filter of, like it's just your grandpa, which is still hard.
Yeah.
But so I guess my kind of like my next question is obviously this was super traumatic for you and for your family,
Mm,
but to the world it was again this thing that happens. They kind of expect you to go back to normal and back to school. And I feel like a lot of people struggle with that where you're like my world
mm.
was just shattered. I watched my grandpa die over the past week and yet I'm back in math class. Can you kind of walk us through what that was like?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And to touch on, people's interpretation of what that grief process would look like for you based on what it is. I think a lot of times people are trying to filter it to protect themselves. They're scared of those emotions and those feelings, and they're a little less, it feels less abrasive if it's a grandparent, I guess, for them. They're just kind of associating that as, okay, good. It's not as intense as I thought. It's almost a protection of themselves, right?
Mm.
When it comes to, reintegrating back to school, that was, of course, hard. I was really lucky. And I think what I would recommend to people is asking for help. I was really lucky because I was missing school a lot already, like I said. And so I was like checking out of school and then checking back into school. So the attendance person actually at my school knew what was going on. So I would just have to go to the office. She knew that I was going to see my grandpa. She didn't give me any grief. She didn't do anything. She was just like, go ahead, come back. The day of my grandpa's funeral, all my friends were calling in saying that they weren't going to be at school in the morning. They were doing all this stuff. And the attendance person, again, this wonderful woman, was just, excusing everybody without, giving them absences or anything. Like, all my
Oh.
friends, like, she knew that it was my grandpa's funeral, and just was being really, really kind to everybody, and was like automatically excusing my high school boyfriend and my best friend. Like, she knew everybody. So it was really nice. Like, I just, by asking for help, that's what I received. And so I would say for anyone who's out there, maybe like reintegrating back into school after a traumatic loss, I mean, there's so many things. I believe in taking time and your teachers will understand and your professors will understand if you're just honest about it and you say what you need, you're going to get the help that you need. And if you don't get the help you need, then, you need to go to a different person and ask for further help, whether that's a dean or a principal or whatever it is. But when it comes to grief and loss, like, you are not going to be great at your schoolwork, at your job, if you're not fully there. And it does take the time to process. I also understand the aspect, though, of like going back into normal life to try to get some normalcy in, but I still truly believe in just honesty and asking for what you want and what you need in order to better yourself. But that also starts with awareness, like, what do I
Mm,
personally need, and then how can I ask that of other people, because no one can read your mind. And even if
yeah.
you're experiencing grief and a loss, a lot of times that person, that professor, they might know, but then they might forget because it's not at the top of their mind, and that's not their fault. It's just that everyone's lives are different, and people do start moving on with their lives after you've, experienced a great loss.
That's really powerful. I think you hit the nail on the head. We have to pause and be like, okay, what do I need? And then
Mhm.
who's my support network around me that I can go and ask questions to, and at least just let them in. Let them in on what's happening, and ask them. Maybe they already have some solutions. Be like, hey, what does the school offer? What does this do? I think
Mhm.
that is so powerful. So thank you so much for that. I'm so sorry for your loss. And I'm so glad that you had a nice support network of people around you. That's really, really
Mhm.
powerful. Do you, as time kind of goes on, and obviously your grandpa was so close to you and so special to you, have you found any way, and again, with the title being Don't Diminish My Loss, have you found any way to cut through to people on truly how special he was beyond just the title of grandpa when you're kind of sharing with them your loss?
Yeah. Stories are just the most powerful thing, and photos and just all that. Like, my boyfriend, my partner now, he's never met my grandpa before. So, that's a big thing because he was such a big part of my life, right? So that's a great example of, trying to relay to someone how special that person was to you, when they weren't ever around. A lot of my high school friends knew my grandpa really well. They celebrated his birthdays all the time. They knew him. So yeah, they were able to kind of differentiate that and understand what a loss it was. Um, my current partner, so sharing with him, my dad and I do a really good job of just kind of sprinkling in stories like, oh yeah, grandpa would have loved that. Or yeah, this is something that reminds me of him. Or I'll tell him, like, my grandpa, if he wore jeans, like, you knew that he was casual that day. Like, he was either at the gym or he was walking or he was doing something. He was going to Menards. Like, I don't know what he was doing, but he never wore jeans. So that has been, the biggest thing of just telling stories that go beyond just a grandpa, and not just a grandpa, but, truly, what does a relationship look like in that sense? Because I know people too who, like, their grandparents were, parental figures to them. And so to, be able to share with somebody more than, this was my grandpa and he passed away or whatever it is. It's like, well, this is little things about him that made him special, and that I enjoyed about him. So it's just, everybody deserves, to share their stories and to be able to share about the person that they've lost, because you'll never truly understand it from their perspective, but to be able to share little memories, has been the most healing thing for me, for sure.
Oh, that's beautiful. And what I love so much about that too, I think on like the very first episode of my show, all these many moons ago, we talked about the authors of our story and the importance of letting people you just meet seeing the past chapters, and
Mm,
recognizing they follow you everywhere you go. But it's
mhm,
tempting sometimes to just be like, just stay forward. But obviously you've learned a really nice balance with that. So that is so inspirational. And I feel like hopefully that gives everybody listening permission to bring up stories. Like, talk therapy is a thing. Like, it's important that
mhm.
you talk through it. And
Yes.
speaking of therapy, I would love to dive in because you are just a powerhouse in the podcast industry. I'll make sure everybody has the link and stuff, but you focus on mental health, and it's called It's Hard podcast. So I would love for you just to get on your soapbox and scream about some of the things that you're like, man, I wish people knew this.
Yes. Oh, so good. Thank you for asking that. Um, and therapy is cool. So it's 2021, therapy is cool. And especially if you're going through grief, therapy is really cool and it's really helpful. My therapist still brings up my grandpa to this day, and she, notices things of where he's showing up. So I totally second that. Um, it's hard is something that I started almost 2 years ago now. So it was November of 2019. I was a senior in college, and I was going through just some really major mental health crises. I was, just experiencing a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. I gotten out of a really toxic relationship, or I should say unhealthy rather than toxic, but it was just an unhealthy
Mm.
relationship overall. And what ended up happening was I was just searching for some sort of a community, that a place where, people shared real stories and that I could feel as though I wasn't alone. And I just couldn't find it anywhere. So I thought, why don't I just create it myself? Because that's what entrepreneurs do. When they can't find something, they just create it themselves. So,
Amen.
and I came from two entrepreneurs. And my grandpa was an entrepreneur. So that tells you anything about, what this world is like. That's kind of how that happened. And I decided to start by sharing just photos of myself on Instagram with long captions about anxiety and just real feelings, and people really responded. So I decided I wanted to share other stories too, and so that's where the podcast started. So what it's grown to today is it's a community to support your mental health, and allow you to feel less alone in what you're going through. So I just talked to real people. I had Mickey on the show talking about grief and her story, and that was so amazing. And she's just fantastic and helped so many people. But having so many amazing people on allows, people to resonate, feel less alone, be like, oh, that person goes to that too. That's really cool. And that's ultimately what I want to do with this podcast, and that's where I want it to go. So we're 2 seasons deep now. Season 3 drops on September 6th. So you can find it anywhere that you listen to podcasts. So feel free to spend the next month catching up on, I think, about 50 episodes at this point. So catch
There's your
up.
homework, folks. Homework for the month. Go watch 50 episodes. I love it.
Exactly. And the name is intentional. If anyone out there is wondering, my last name is Boner, and the name is definitely intentional. So we like to have a little bit of fun too while we're at
There you
it.
go. Hey, if you can't laugh about it, who can? Right?
Exactly. That's what my grandpa taught me. His last name was Boner, and he always taught me that we don't pretend that it's not. Except he also thought for a long time, because it was like a slang term, but it wasn't a slang term until he was a little bit older. So kids would start prank calling him from the yellow books, because they would like find inappropriate last names and they'd call him. He's like, Greg, why are these kids calling me and asking me about my last name? Because it used to mean a funny. So he used to write articles, columns in the newspaper, and it would be like Dave's boners. So it's like Dave's funnies, like jokes and comics. And then it got really inappropriate really fast. So
Oh
that's
no. Oh no.
so he wasn't as aware of it as my dad was growing up. My dad's like, "Thanks, dad." Like,
Oh, that's tough. Wow.
yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I love that. That's hilarious. So, on It's Hard, you mentioned that one of the best things is we can, find community to not feel alone. What are some of the things that you feel like people prior to perhaps finding It's Hard podcast felt alone in that you want to say,
Mm.
hey, that you're not alone. This is normal.
Oh, there's so many things. I would say anxiety, depression, any sort of mental, disorder, mental illness, if you will. Those sound like really scary words, but they're not. It's just truly, different mental experiences like OCD and phobias and ADHD and ADD. I think people feel like they're crazy in that sense, and they're just not. So many people experience these things. I think people feel alone in their experiences with eating disorders, with
Mm.
self doubt, with grief, with being a widow, singleness, relationship troubles, breakups. Like there is like endless amounts of things that people for so long have internalized and have
Mm.
not expressed outwardly that this is something that they struggle with. And to hear someone else be like, yeah, and then this happened, and I struggled with this, and this. It's like, oh shit. Okay. I don't know if I can swear, but oh crap. Like I'm not the only person that struggles with this. So, um, I think there is so many different things and it looks different for everybody, but those are just some topics that I've talked on with different guests that have really resonated with people, and
Mm.
have, they've been able to share. Sobriety is that another one,
Oh,
being a young sober. I'm sober, I'm 23, and that's a unpopular thing to be a part of, but once you start talking about it, like literally a woman posted about it on social media yesterday. She reshared my episode, and now we have a group on our Instagram that has like 30 people in it, and it's all people who are like sober curious. And you would have never known
oh,
had you not shared
wow.
that.
That's
So,
amazing. That's so powerful.
so
That is
cool.
so cool. And
Yeah.
I guess as we kind of, wrap up our time together here, is there anything, any last words that you would like to leave with somebody who's perhaps walking through the world feeling like they're not, people aren't taking their loss seriously and they're like, oh, it was just your grandpa, it was just whatever. Is there any last kind of words of wisdom that you would like to leave with us?
Yeah. It's so much easier said than done, but like do what's best for yourself, and other people are going to move on with their lives. They're going to keep going just as much as you would if you were in their shoes. But know that your grief is not less than. And if you're experiencing it, you're going to experience it for a long time. It's been 6 years almost and I'm still experiencing it. So it happens, it's real, and to experience it and to allow yourself to feel all of your feelings and recognize them is so important. And grief looks so different in so many, it can be heartbreak, it can be, moving to a new place, it can be many different things. Um so allow yourself to feel, and never listen to those who might diminish your grief.
Mm. Preach it from the rooftop, Paige. Thank you so much. So great to have you here. We'll definitely have to have you back on the show.
Yes, thank you so much, Mickey.
Well, everybody, if you liked what Paige had to say, make sure you head on over to her podcast. It's Hard Podcast. The link is in there. And if you're not on my email list, make sure you're on that too, because I'm going to make sure I send how to contact her and all that good stuff and some of the show notes there as well. And if you checked your email today, you might have noticed we're going through a little bit of a rebrand. And the theme is Grief's a Beach. And I'm just gonna like leave it at that. So you are gonna see a lot more palm trees, a lot more ocean. I don't know. I just was feeling like I just wanted to share that phrase hit me a couple days ago, and I was like, "Grief's a beach," and of course that's a play off of "Life's a bitch." Life's a beach. Well, grief is obviously not a pleasant experience, but I hope that this show is something that you can come and talk about it in a safe, uplifting way that doesn't feel super somber. So if you haven't yet, make sure you connect with me on Instagram, on my email list. And if you think a friend would like this show, especially with the new Grief's a Beach vibe coming, make sure we get connected too, because I want to make sure the whole world has an outlet, just like Paige said, to feel community and get answers that they need. So, if you know somebody who, perhaps yourself, who has lost a grandparent, has lost somebody earlier in their life, and again, the world hears that, and perhaps they say, "Yeah, but like grandparents die, like that's kind of how it goes," or they lived a long life, like that's nice, and it's like, yes, I get that. And Christmas is still really hard without them. I would highly encourage you to check out my book, My Heart Still Remembers. It's quite literally designed for people to go back into that memory bank and pull out authors of their story from their past to be able to reconnect with those memories and feel. It's amazing how much more grounded we feel when we allow those authors to come back up to the surface. So make sure you check out a copy of My Heart Still Remembers. I'm going to just kind of close it out with a little quote from that, just to kind of leave you leave you with a little homework if you wanted to. So step 1 is recollection, step 2 is legacy, and step 3 is gratitude. It says, as we continue to put back together all that our loved one was, it's almost impossible to not see how much of an impact they have had on our lives. When we allow our current actions to be grounded in past influences, our roots grow deeper and stronger. We feel more connected with where we are and less confused about our life now. We cannot control the fact that they are gone, but we can choose to honor them with our gratitude. And from there, it gives you kind of prompts to think about, like, what are you grateful for? So just for all of us, just to think about together today, a couple things that I would just encourage you just to set a timer for 10 minutes and just ask yourself these things: is envision that person and answer, what were some of my happiest memories with them? They taught me the importance of blank. And last but certainly not this, their values inspired me to. So I'm going to leave that with you guys today. If you haven't checked out my song, My Heart Still Remembers, make sure you do that, because I feel like it's going to sync all of this together. And I'm going to see you next week with Alexia from Mainstream Miscarriage. And she's back on to talk about phase 2 of our show that we did a couple weeks ago, where we talked about miscarriage misconceptions. But we didn't get to go into the next big phase, which is, what if somebody wants to have kids again? And how do we appropriately support them on that journey? Because, spoiler alert, saying congratulations can be really hard for somebody who had a miscarriage and now they're pregnant again. I can't wait for you to see that episode. It's going to be so amazing. So make sure you tune in next week and join that email list at mickyspear.com. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.